Well, hello and welcome live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. This is the Week in Review, of course, a program where we review some of the big stories to come out of the week, what's been making headlines and getting South Africans talking. I'm your host, Liesl Wilson. Let's take a look at some of those headlines. South Africa's positivity rate in coronavirus cases now stands at 22.5% after recording 8,351 new cases in the last 24 hours. A key state witness in the murder trial of soccer star Senzo Meyiwa has reportedly died. And Deputy President David Mabuza has promised military veterans that they should be receiving their pension payouts very soon. Right, those will look at your headlines. Let's get into some of those stories on the Week in Review. We start off with a key state witness in the murder trial of soccer star Senzo Meyiwa, who has passed away. Police have confirmed the death of Philani Ndlovu to the SABC. Ndlovu was one of the first police officials to arrive at the scene of the fatal incident. Meyiwa was shot at the home of the mother of his then-girlfriend, musician Kelly Kumalo, in Vosloorus. The death comes just days after defense advocate Malisela Defo approached the courts to have the trial brought forward, claiming that the lives of witnesses were in danger. All 5 men are currently standing trial for Meyiwa's death, and Ndlovu was expected to be called as a state witness to assist the court in establishing what exactly transpired on that fateful day, October evening in 2014. The trial is expected to resume at the end of the month, with Sergeant Thabo Mosia being cross-examined by the defense for the 5th accused. Right now, President Cyril Ramaphosa will deliver the keynote address at the opening ceremony of the 5th Global Conference on the Elimination of Child Labour. Government and the International Labour Organization are hosting this conference in South Africa for the first time. The conference starts tomorrow, ends on Friday at the Nkosi Albert Luthuli International Convention Centre in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. Our acting presidential spokesperson, Tyrone Seal.
President Cyril Ramaphosa will deliver the keynote address at the opening ceremony of the 5th Global Conference on the Elimination of Child Labour on Sunday the 15th of May 2022. The conference takes place at the Nkosi Albert Luthuli International Convention Centre in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal from the 15th to the 20th of May 2022, with the opening ceremony scheduled for 12:30 on Sunday. The South African government and the International Labour Organization are hosting this conference in South Africa for the first time. Despite progress in many regions, 160 million children are still in child labour. According to the ILO, numbers are rising and the COVID-19 pandemic threatens to reverse years of progress. The global conference will discuss good practices implemented by the different actors around the world and will identify urgent measures needed to accelerate the elimination of both child labour and forced labour. The conference will also include 28 side events, which are 1-hour sessions that will allow delegates to further share knowledge and experiences related to the main topics addressed in the event. The 5th conference takes place consistent with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal Target 8.7, which calls for the abolition of all forms of child labour by 2025 and the abolition of forced labour, modern slavery and human trafficking by 2030. More than 4,000 representatives of government, trade unions, the private sector, civil society, regional and international organizations, as well as youth and children from all over the world, will participate in plenaries, presentations and side events.
Right, moving on to other stories that have made headlines. The latest figures from the National Institute for Communicable Diseases show a positivity rate in coronavirus cases amounting to 22.5%. It follows 8,351 new cases, which was recorded in the last 24 hours. This increase in the total number of active cases to 76,274 where the health department has meanwhile updated the figures of people succumbing to COVID-19 related complications by 114, with 3 deaths reported in the latest 24 to 48-hour period. This now brings the death toll to 100,744. Right, Dr. Ridwan Suleiman, Senior Researcher at CSIR, joins us to analyze the data emerging. Dr. Ridwan, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon, Diesel. Thanks for having me.
Let's take a look at the numbers. Let's look at the trends from the data emerging. What is the latest with this data in the last reporting cycle? What trends, what conclusions can we be drawing at this juncture?
So what we have been seeing for at least the past 3 to 4 weeks is a sustained increase in the number of confirmed cases or infection rates in the country. And that has been confirmed by an increase in the test positivity rate, also sustained over the past 3 to 4 weeks. In fact, we have been in a 5th wave of COVID-19 infections in the country for at least 3 weeks, if not 4 weeks now. But promisingly, over the past week, we are seeing that the rate of increase has actually been slowing down, particularly in the provinces of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, showing signs that we are possibly nearing or even at the peak of the 5th wave of infections right now.
Okay, so you speak about this 5th wave that South Africa is currently in. We're looking at the nature of the virus, hospital admissions, the rate of deaths, perhaps in comparison to the number of cases. What is also coming through on that front?
Sure. So in terms of the 5th wave of infections, for me, once we breached thresholds of 5 new cases per 100,000 population, as well as when the test positivity rate breached 10%, it indicated that we were likely going to see a sustained increase, which we have seen. So no doubt we are well into that 5th wave of infections. But that being said, it shouldn't be read with the same sort of panic or anxiety or fear that we have had during the previous 4 waves, because even with the very large increase in infections, there remains the significant decoupling between infections and severe outcomes of hospitalization and deaths, as we started seeing during the 4th wave or the Omicron-driven 4th wave over our summer months. That trend of decoupling has continued. So while we're seeing very many infections over the past few weeks, there are significantly fewer hospitalizations and deaths over the same period. Both those hospitalizations and deaths are lagging indicators, and they have shown signs of an increase, yes. However, it is not as high as what we have experienced over any of the previous 4 waves.
All right, so you've given us an overview of what's transpiring in the country at large. I wonder if we can begin to hone in on the provincial statistics that are coming through. Can you talk to us about the provincial cases, the provincial positivity rate, particularly as we look at Gauteng and KZN? What's the severity of the data emerging there?
So we know that the increase that we have been seeing nationally over the past month has been driven by what has been happening in the 2 populous provinces of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Those 2 provinces really driving the surge in infections and driving the 5th wave that we're seeing nationally, primarily due to the emergence of the BA4 and BA5 sublineages of the Omicron variant. So those BA4 and BA5 sublineages have continued to increase in prevalence in these provinces and now through the rest of the country. So in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, we have seen this rise in infections, but over the course of the past week, they're both showing signs of slowing down, which is contributing to the slowing rate of infections nationally. While those 2 provinces are slowing down, all of the other provinces are showing signs of an increase, in particular Western Cape now showing a significant rise in infection rates, up now 50% over the course of the past week, but so too all of the other provinces. So we're seeing, as we saw during the previous waves, the COVID-19 virus or infection rates starting in certain provinces, but then spreading throughout the rest of the country. The test positivity rates in all of the provinces really confirm the trends that we're seeing in infection rates. The test positivity increasing in all of the provinces, and in fact quite high, above 30% in KwaZulu-Natal, close to 30% in Western Cape, and in excess of 16% basically, between 16 and 30% in all of the provinces. So really confirming the rise in infections is that test positivity measure. That being said, it is showing signs of a decline in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Moving then on to the lagging indicators or severity, we continue to see that decoupling between infection rates and then hospitalizations and deaths, even at the provincial level. Most telling is if we look at the Gauteng province, which showed the earliest signs of an increase as mentioned, the hospitalization rates as well as the number of deaths being reported remain significantly lower and decoupled from the infection rates currently.
All right, and then obviously looking at some of the other contributing factors, including the easing of regulations, perhaps also the holidays that we have had for the past month as well, must have also been some of the contributing factors to the increase in the number of infections as people gathered, more frequently.
Yeah, no doubt those increased gatherings and people being in closer contact would have contributed to the increasing rate of infections that we have been seeing. We've gone through holiday periods, the Ramadan gatherings, Easter period, Passover, all of these religious gatherings, plus also an opening up of many sectors and the economy, many people also returning to work. So there has been an increase in contact, and certainly this has likely contributed to the increase. But I think we need to understand the fact that the virus is continuously mutating, and we have seen an emergence of the BA4 and BA5 sublineages of the Omicron variant. And this is probably, or this change or emergence of these sublineages is probably most contributing to the increase that we're now seeing once again. Remember, the 4 previous waves that we experienced in South Africa were all driven by a distinct or different variant of concern. And now we have different sublineages of the Omicron variant driving the increase right now.
Yeah, absolutely, Redwan, because my next question then looks at the issue of vaccination at large. And with the stats coming through around that, only about half of our adult population is fully vaccinated. And I wonder how this is perhaps going to come back and, haunt us, if I can use that word, for lack of a better word, now that we are entering this 5th wave. I mean, you've also got the vaccination rollout program and concerns that arise due to the winter season that's approaching. What are the numbers showing in that regard?
So yes, we've administered just over 35 million vaccination doses across the country, which, as you indicated, covers about 49 or close to half of the adult population. If we look at in terms of the total population, those vaccination rates mean that just over 30% of the total population in the country are considered fully vaccinated. But I think we also need to take into account that the vaccination rate has slowed significantly. We're currently averaging around 40,000 doses per day on average, at least over the past week. I think in addition to that, we need to bear in mind in South Africa that there are many people who have been previously infected. And so seroprevalence surveys indicate estimated immunity levels of over 80% in certain areas in the country. So that is a combination of the vaccination that we have discussed, but also natural immunity through past infections. So those high levels of population immunity are likely contributing to the decrease or this decoupling that we're seeing, and this decrease in severe outcomes of hospitalization and death. So even with the emergence of the new sublineages of Omicron and different variants, we're still seeing that those high levels of immunity continue to protect against the severe outcomes, and we're seeing less hospitalization and less deaths, which is encouraging and promising news.
All right, so Redwan, let me wrap up the conversation then by just look at, something that emerged yesterday during the Health Minister's address. Health Minister Dr. Joe Phaahla coming out to say that currently there's about one doctor for every 1,000 patients in hospitals. He was obviously responding to a question in Parliament on the doctor-patient ratio. And I just wonder, given the context of where South Africa finds itself in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, what concerns are raised through this, given the next wave of infections emerging?
Yeah, that statistic is quite concerning. And I think the South African healthcare sector, in particular, the public sector, has always been under pressure and always constrained, even pre-COVID pandemic. The COVID pandemic, I think, has exacerbated the burden on the healthcare system, particularly during the first three surges or waves, where we even had elective surgeries as well as non-COVID related treatment having to be paused and put on hold just due to cope with the increasing demand. Currently, with this fifth surge or fifth wave of infections, fortunately, as mentioned, we're not seeing as many hospitalizations as we saw during the previous waves. There are currently just over 3,000 patients in hospitals across the country due to COVID-19. That figure is increasing, and it certainly is creating an increased burden on the healthcare sector, but not as much as we experienced during the previous waves. And hopefully it won't be significant to stop non-COVID related treatment and other elective surgeries. But that being said, I think that we've been in a health pandemic for over 2 years now, and one would have hoped that the healthcare sector and health capacities would have increased significantly, particularly more support for staff, as well as facilities and capacity across the healthcare system. But unfortunately, we're still sort of working on crisis mode and just coping with the demand. So I think there certainly a lot can still be done to assist the healthcare sector, in particular the public sector.
Dr. Redwan Suleman, thank you very much for your time. Again, Dr. Redwan Suleman is a senior researcher at the CSIR, again, helping to make sense rather of the numbers. This is the country comes to term with the latest COVID-19 infections. We're going to leave the conversation there, take a quick ad break, and continue with more news and updates on the other side. Welcome back. The Week in Review continues with myself, Liesl Wilson. In other news, the High Court in Bloemfontein has postponed proceedings in the restraint order application on the Gupta assets. The matter will now be heard on the 20th and the 21st of October. The National Prosecuting Authority Investigating Directorate wants assets belonging to the Gupta family and family business associate Iqbal Sharma to remain in state custody. The provincial restraint order has granted in June last year and was extended 3 times now. The case relates to 24.9 million rand that the Free State Agriculture Department paid for a feasibility study for potential farming projects within the province.
It essentially means that the application or request by the directors of Island Site to get a 4-week postponement in order for them to take this matter on possible appeal, for them to be able to get a locus standi or right to be part and parcel of these proceedings has been dismissed. Costs in that matter have been reserved. But what is important to clarify so that everybody knows is that the interim restraint order against the assets of the Guptas, meaning Island Site, Nulani Investment and Iqbal Sharma, basically means that the assets will continue to be in safekeeping under the state-appointed curator. The rule nisi, or the interim restraint, has been extended up until October 20 to 21st. I always say this, it means that we can have peaceful night's sleep knowing that those assets won't be sold off, those shares won't be sold off to other parties. It means that while we continue to fight the good fight as the NPA Investigating Directorate, those assets will not leave our shores.
Meanwhile, the East London Regional Court has granted Walter Sisulu University student Sibongile Mani permission to appeal her 5-year sentence, but denied the application to appeal the conviction. The matter relates to the 14 million rand NSFAS money, which was erroneously deposited into her account back in 2017. She spent over 800,000 rand of that money.
Scenes of jubilation as Sibongile Mani will get to appeal her sentence in a different court. The matter has drawn public interest, with some pledging to cover Mani's legal fees. Her legal representative remains confident that another court will not give Mani a jail term.
We are going to petition the High Court with regards to the conviction, because the issue of sentence is very clear. She was granted the leave. With regards to the conviction, obviously we are going to pursue it. We are going to petition the High Court, and we are very much confident, very much so. So we are ready. Again, we are continuing with this change.
We're just happy that we came back with Sibongile. Sisathembisa nangoku to the whole nation that we will fight tooth and nail to ensure that Sibongile does not go to jail, because we believe and still hold the view that he is not guilty.
The National Prosecuting Authority, on the other hand, says it is well prepared to head to the High Court.
We accepted this court decision today, and we will be going to the High Court, of course, to put our side of the case in as far as the sentencing is concerned. Because on the issue of conviction, the magistrate agreed with us that we had proved the case beyond reasonable doubt.
A date for the matter to be heard in the High Court is yet to be established. Abongile Yankees, SABC News, East London.
Well, moving on to other news now. This past Tuesday, Health Minister Dr. Joe Phaahla tabled his budget speech vote in Parliament. One of the issues that came under spotlight is the ratio of 1 doctor per 3,000 patients. This suggests that there is a shortage within the healthcare professionals. But joining us for more on this, Dr. Anjali Kutsia, member of the Solidarity Doctors Network Advisory Board, joins us to analyze further. Very good afternoon to you, Dr. Kutsia. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and a good afternoon to everyone out there.
Some concerning figures coming through, announced by our Health Minister, Dr. Joe Phaahla. This figure of 1 doctor per 3,000 patients puts the delivery of services by doctors at a very slow pace, it seems.
Yes, you are absolutely correct. And again, just to inform the listeners out there that the World Health Organization's guidelines is 1 doctor per 1,000 patients. Another thing that is of severe concern to us is that in the stats that has been done in 2019, we had 1 doctor per 1,266 patients. So 3 years later, we are now sitting on 1 doctor per 3,198 patients. So this raises a huge concern. So what happened in the past 3 years? What happened to those doctors? Did they immigrated? Did they just left the practice? Did they retire? What happened? And also, we need to understand whether these stats are accurate. It might even be lower. I don't think it would be higher. I think it would be lower. So we're really going to do a survey. There is no proper survey done so far.
So speaking about, what could have happened, what are some of the contributing factors for the challenges that are facing the healthcare sector in regard to the ratio and the data emerging?
So there are what we call the brain drain or the pull and push factors. Interesting enough, if you look at data on studies being done, since 2010, 2012, there was quite a few studies done on this from the doctors, and why are there not enough doctors? So it's not a new thing. It's been here for the last 10 years. but there was no urgency from National Department of Health or the provinces to address this. And so if you look at the brain drain thing, most of the doctors that were, according to a lot of these surveys, that left the country to emigrated, they actually emigrated more because, not so much because of a better remuneration. Yes, their packages of remuneration were much better, but a lot of the data that was given was because of a safer environment. That was a problem. Living conditions was a problem. Lack of facilities, lack of promotion, no future. A lot of these young doctors didn't see, and middle-aged doctors didn't see any future in South Africa anymore. In political instability, all of that, a hard or a heavy workload. So that are from the doctor's side. There was studies, 2 surveys done, one by SAMA, one by Solidarity, the past 2 to 3 years. Both studies indicated that about 40% of doctors, when asked if national health insurance is going to be implemented as it is currently in the draft, what will they do? Will they immigrate? Will they consider? And 40% says, yes, we will consider leaving the country. And I know by the time when that was released, there was a lot of people in government that sort of criticized it and say, yes, it was not a big enough sample and all of that. But the bottom line is, they need to start to listen what the doctors are saying. Again, this has been here since 2010, that studies has been done. The other thing that is even more of a concern is that most of these doctors, especially in the public sector, private sector, on GP level and specialist level, around about in their late 50s, meaning that the majority of them will, within the next 5 to 10 years, start to retire. There's no succession planning so far. There's no urgency to get our skills being transferred to these younger people, as well as to a young upcoming specialist or in training of specialists. So when government finally wakes up, there's not going to be a lot of doctors left. And please understand, we can't even rely on our healthcare to be nurse-led. So because according to 2019 figures, the average should be 1 to 1.38 per thousand nurses. South Africa was 1.1 per thousand nurses. So even the notion of nurse-led healthcare is not going to realize.
So, which looks at my next point, because I was going to speak about the brain drain, you know, not only being an issue with doctors, but obviously also affecting nurses as well. And looking at what those contingency plans look like, particularly in relation to, you know, how it's impacting the patients, given that we're still in a COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, well, it can only have a negative effect on the nurses. So what we have seen, and it's also well documented, especially during Delta, the amount of burnout the doctors and the nursing staff experienced. And we also call it PTSD. So it means if we get a next severe disease of infectious disease type of thing that we have seen in Delta, that those doctors and nurses will have a PTSD experience, meaning that their compassion, their own emotional status would be in jeopardy. And that makes it difficult for one to have empathy and compassion with these patients. And it's not only related to the patients, it's also relating to and spill over to your home and your family. So we are in trouble. And there's no urgency. So, you know, one of the things that we seriously need to look at is to start to train in the private sector doctors and specialists. There should be a public-private partnership with the provinces or National Department of Health, where we start training We cannot rely on Cuba or China or any of those other places to train our students.
So how do
need
so
to
Dr.
start training
Kutsia,
students here.
Dr. Kutsia, with, organizations such as the South African Medical Association, amongst others, how can we then begin to perhaps assist government to deal with this problem? Just in conclusion, as we wrap this conversation.
Okay. Dialogue, stop mistrusting each other, listen to what is happening at ground level, take political ideology away, look at the real problem and address the real problem. We don't need to have long investigations, committees, anything. We all know what the problem is. We need to start to address it.
All right, Dr. Kutsia, thank you very much for your time once again. Dr. Angelique Kutsia is a member of the Solidarity Doctors Network Advisory Board, again chatting to us about one of the issues that came under the spotlight this week in regards to the ratio of the doctor per patient in the country. We continue to monitor that situation. Perhaps as more information comes through from government and other stakeholders, we'll bring you more on that. But we'll leave that conversation for now. Take a quick ad break and continue with more news on the other side. Welcome back. The Week in Review continues with myself, Liesl Wilson. In other news, the newly elected leadership of the ANC in the Eastern Cape has committed to prioritizing the challenges faced by the people in the province. Chairperson Oscar Mabuyane, his deputy Mlungisi Mvoko, as well as the secretary Lulama Ngugai-Tobi, were all re-elected during the 9th Provincial Elective Conference in East London. A new provincial treasurer, Zolile Williams, was also elected. Perhaps to contextualize and give us more, we're joined by political analyst Professor Sipho Siepe. A very good afternoon to you, Prof. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Prof, just getting straight into it, Oscar Mabuyane winning obviously at the Eastern Cape Elective Conference, perhaps looking at what this means for the ANC as it leads to the elective conference come December, hopefully.
First, it's no secret that the contestation within the ANC in terms of elected leadership will be defined and decided by the lower structures, starting from the branches to the provinces that will influence the branches. In a sense, one would say you expect that the branches will influence the provincial and the provincial will influence what happens at the national level. But ultimately, it is the branches that make a decision. But at the same time, you could also begin to see the trend. And one of the issues in this contestation, which was quite tough in the Eastern Cape, was really about securing the second term. And what from the to the House the concern was whether Oscar will be returned, because he had already declared his support for the Ramaphosa second term presidency. So the House looked at this, the outcome of this much more with a hawk eye, because it will be indicative of whether it will be the smooth sailing for Ramaphosa's leadership. And when Ramaphosa himself went to Eastern Cape, the glee and the excitement and the happiness was very clear, because what it meant is that he can count on that province supporting his second term as the leader of the ANC. But what was also interesting about the conference is that the outcome itself was fractional. When you have a consistency of votes in terms of the gap between each and every contestant, then you know that this was a fractional outcome. So it does not mean that the issues and the challenges within the ANC are going to be resolved. What has happened is that they've actually deepened. The second thing that was worrying about the Eastern Cape is the fact that this conference did not even engage the policy issues. If you are going to prioritize the people of Eastern Cape, the first thing that you do is that you start discussing policy. And only when you have discussed policy and you have policy proposition, then members can then make a decision on who are the best cadres of the movement, who can advance and make sure that these policy outcomes and resolutions are implemented. So that did not take place. So effectively, the people's concerns were never part of the discussion. So this actually shows what has become a problem with the ANC, that while it hopes that the people will vote for it, but when it comes to the moments when they should be discussing about the challenges facing the people, the discussion centers around leadership contestation. And President Ramaphosa himself acknowledged as much that it is unfortunate that the policy debate did not take place. But he was saying now that the leadership has been elected, then they can enter into those debates without having to worry about the position, which is a problem because the concern that one must have is that if you elect a wrong person and you come up with policy debates and policy discussions that require a different type of person, you have already made the decision. It's almost like hiring a truck driver or a truck driver, and then you decide to say out of the discussion that you need a pilot. So you would have gotten the wrong person. So but the most important thing is that the people of the province who have suffered under the leadership of Oscar Mabuyane, because if you now look at the performance of the province, it is one of the lowest performing provinces, high unemployment, infrastructure that has collapsed, but also a party that is disunited.
Prof, speaking of policy and change, and also, how it's been it's a second term rather for most in the slate in the province. I wonder what they're going to be doing for the people of the Eastern Cape. As you alluded to, the Eastern Cape, the situation seems to be in a dire situation in relation to water, health, infrastructure. What are some of these priority areas that they're going to have to navigate?
Well, these issues that they are raising, that even the president of the country had raised about South Africa's challenges, these are known issues. They don't start because of this conference or the previous conference. So the promises are some things, they're beginning to sound like a stuck record. They are repeating these things, but you've had the leadership, even this leadership is not new to positions of government, and they had failed. So what does it mean for people of the province? It is that they should expect more of the same. If you've had people who had failed and you have those people being returned, the least you can expect is that they will probably be the same people. People don't change that dramatically. The elections of the people who are incompetent, who had failed, does not immediately make them competent. So that is one thing that we must actually put aside. And we know that the people of Eastern Cape need a leadership that has a vision. And this leadership has not shown anything beyond promises. It's the same thing at the national level. When President Ramaphosa got into the position, he promised economic growth, he promised investment, and there were a lot of public relations exercises. But as we speak, we have highest unemployment, business confidence has plummeted, we're not even dealing with the coronavirus pandemic properly, corruption is still rife. So what we have, and South Africans will be getting, is more promises, and a very intensive struggle for leadership within the ANC.
Well, speaking of performance, another issue that's obviously, or factor rather, that's come to the surface again, the Hawks, yet to come forth about the Mabuyane Madikizela criminal investigation. What do you make of that as he's been re-elected at this point?
It makes a mockery of the notion of a clean government. It makes a mockery of a commitment to what's dealing with corruption. What you also have is that there seems to be a reluctance by the state organs to pursue cases that involves a certain group of people, depending on who they are aligned with. You have also others who are charged in this country, and then the case continue for a number of years. And when you start having that, people can begin to read that the state organs are now being used to decide who becomes the leader of the ANC, because the ANC has taken a position that says whoever gets charged must not make themselves available. So you'll see people like Mabuyane not being charged, because if he's charged, the smile in President Ramaphosa will disappear, because the position of the ANC will kick in. But what we're going to see is more reluctance. We've had the Zono Commission that had implicated certain people who also belong to the so-called transference faction of Ramaphosa. And you have not seen the NPA and the Hawks getting excited about saying, maybe we have enough. And one must make a distinction here. You have a judge who sat there listening to the evidence and or the testimony, and on the basis of that, he had made some recommendations. We still don't see those being implemented for people who are seen to be pro-Ramaphosa. And yet we see a lot of activity when it is people belonging to the other faction. So this absence of consistency undermines the message of the president. But even the president himself, we know that he started first by making sure that affairs that involve him are never in the public. He rushed to the courts to say, you still, and we also found a most amazing thing, that the NGOs that always tell us that the truth must be made public have been very silent. So what you have here is that there's been a sense of failure at all levels, societal level, at the government level, and also at the organization level. And that does not augur well for this country.
Prof, just, as we wrap up the conversation, I want to move from the Eastern Cape and take a look at two other issues. I mean, the ANC in Mpumalanga's failure to take action against one of the men accused in the Hillary Gadi case. I wonder if it's also called into question whether more amendments still need to be made to the step-aside resolution. What are your thoughts on this matter?
Well, if the ANC wants to deal with corruption, it needs not to rush and be looking at the elective conference, which seems to be the way the ANC now, or modus operandi, is dictated by what the impact of that would be with regard to the elective conference. And if that is how we are going to deal with corruption, then you are going to have these inconsistencies. You will have failure. It doesn't matter how much you are going to strengthen the step-aside rule. But if it is not applied consistently, then you're also going to have a problem. Because ultimately, it is a state that charges. And if now you have the state organs taking a position, and then you have the party jumping to say, because of this, of the state action, we are going to do the following. Then what it means is that the party is now run through the state machinery, where people who are deployed and appointed by those who hold forth in government are going to dictate who becomes a leader of the ANC. And I think members of the ANC are becoming aware of that. This is why they are beginning to question not only the state institutions, but they're even questioning the judiciary. The concern that the former Chief Justice had raised is that we have reached a stage where when certain things go to the courts, people know even before there's a pronouncement what the outcome will be. So what we have now is also a possibility of a captured judiciary. And Mokwe says once you have that, then even the constitution that we talk about becomes meaningless. But that also goes to the things that we become passionate about. And the issue is, to what extent are we advancing the cause of the people? The people of this country have shown unhappiness with the leadership of the ANC, starting with Ramaphosa, from booing him during the electoral campaigns of the municipality contestation to when he appeared at the May rally. And that, I think, will continue. So the ANC may play its game, but ultimately, come 2024, the people will decide whether this party has put them first or whether it has put the interest of its leaders, the elite in the ANC, whether those interests have come first before the people.
Prof, I'm going to leave the conversation there, move on to, another sad incident that happened this week when we heard of the passing of Professor Barry Hanyani from the Northwest University. I mean, he was obviously someone committed to, furthering discourse and conversations in South Africa, revered academic, always willing to help. Were you close to him? Perhaps as you reflect on his life and times and his contribution in upholding democracy in South Africa, what comes to mind as we look back on his life and times?
Well, first of all, one must credit him for choosing to be part of the discourse in this country, to participate. Because what is most important is to give the notion of vibrancy of our society expression. And Barry was actually doing that through his engagement. And he was also willing to write. He was being available. But what is so important is to start having young people being seen to say, we are also raising our hands in being part of the solution. And that is what his contribution was. And also at the level of scholarship, he was somebody who was always invited to make presentation, especially when it comes to issues that have to do with administration and management, especially when they relate to the state. So I think the community that he was part of the South African Administration and Management Association, who has lost somebody who they would have considered to be a soldier. And given his youthful age, he had much more to give to this country. So we should all be saddened by the loss of Barry. He was just a wonderful person.
Prof, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for echoing those fond sentiments about the life and times of Professor Barry Nyani. We're going to leave the conversation there. Professor Sipho Siepe giving us an update on what transpired this week after the election of the ANC's elective conference in the Eastern Cape, and perhaps what we can look forward to on that political front. Again, also paying respects to the late Professor Barry Nyani. We will continue with more news on the other side. We'll be right back.
Jay, when we were watching Sibongile Mani, we were dancing mobile had a room divider.
That's old. When men made us feel at home and 50-50 was just a show on TV.
That's because they were scared. Now we're learning lessons from the real bads on the estate and Guyana.
Hotspot Sally says mom just right for the weekend.
Paying our TV licenses keeps industries alive. Let's stay informed, educated, and entertained.
Telling stories for the now generation. tvlic.co.za.
SABC News brings you all the latest stories from around South Africa and the world.
I'm Frances Hurd. When I first approach an interview, I try to think, what do you as the audience really want answers to? Those are the pertinent questions, and I don't shy away from those. AfriForum's advocate Mark Oppenheimer has told the Supreme Court of Appeal that displaying the flag, the old South African flag, during the 2017 Black Monday protests was not planned and that the motive behind the act is not known. Oppenheimer says AfriForum opposes a ban of displaying the 1928 flag, but advocate Mbeka Ngugaitobi refutes AfriForum's claim that it does not necessarily support the display of the flag, but is against the ban. Ngugaitobi, representing the Nelson Mandela Foundation, argues that the old flag represents white domination over black people and that there is no correlation between farm killings and the flag. AfriForum is appealing an Equality Court finding that displaying the old flag constitutes hate speech and harassment. Let's take a look at some of the arguments in court this week.
Just I submit two things. The first is that the Equality Court is a creature of statute. It only has the powers granted to it by the Act. It cannot do things that it is not empowered to do. And the Act is very clear. It says, after an incident has taken place. It may be desirable to have different legislation which allows the court to prognosticate and issue opinions. Ordinarily, however, we think that this is not the domain of courts, that this is the domain of the legislature. That if the legislature wants to make certain pronouncements about certain words and certain symbols, it must do so through a democratic process.
So, this is a celebration of white supremacy. And it's unashamed, and it is explicit, and it stares you in the face. Thank you. So, if it is clear then that the flag symbolizes the arrival of Jan van Riebeeck, it symbolizes the supremacy of the British, then the question is, and they explicitly say when they introduce it, that the backward races, meaning the black people, must feel proud at their protection and their upliftment. It's clear then that it is a symbol, not just of exclusion, but of domination. Blacks are afforded an inferior status. Whites are presumed superior.
In other news, 7 men accused of killing Zimbabwean national Elvis Nyathi have been granted bail of 3,000 rand each in the Randburg Magistrates Court. The group accused of killing Nyathi in Diepsloot last month during the unrest over crime within that area.
After almost a month behind bars, they are finally out on bail.
Based on the evidence presented by the defense pertaining to the identification parade, taking into account that crimes of this nature are dependent on the identification of the perpetrators, it is this court's finding that exceptional circumstances have been placed before the court that permits the applicant's release on bail.
The men are accused of a Schedule 6 offence, which is premeditated murder and related charges. The Deep Sleuth 7 face charges of murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, robbery with aggravating circumstances, assault with the intent to do grievous bodily harm, and extortion. Handing down judgment, Magistrate Hlezi Pimkhasibe says there's no evidence proving that the accused would intimidate witnesses or endanger the community. The magistrate raised concerns that the state failed to provide substantial evidence to prove the alleged role each of the accused played in the murder of Elvis Nyathi. She says, therefore, the state failed to provide exceptional evidence to prove exactly why they should be denied bail.
Also, there's a difference between the trial itself and the bail application stage. Bail application hearings are at a balance of probability, whilst in the trial stage, we'll have to prove our case beyond reasonable doubt.
The case has been postponed to the 7th of July for further investigations. Patricia Fasaki, SABC News in Randburg.
Well, we've come to the end of the show for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. We're going to leave it for you for the you today right there, and be back tomorrow for a look at the week ahead, where we take a look at some of the stories to come through for the week ahead. For myself, Liesl Wilson, and the team, until then, it's goodbye for now.
This week on It's Topical,